Tom Lugo,
yeah.
thank you very much. On a comparison of JS animation frameworks.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool that we got to see like these two presentations earlier because they talked a lot about practicality in real life, which I think is awesome. That's pretty much the theme of our presentation as well. I was an intern actually at Josh and Mike's agency. It was called Third Cousin. And I got to do a lot of cool work, but I also got to have a lot of fun too with learning new things. In particular, we have a lot of clients that requested banners that needed to be made and stuff like that. So they kind of handed it off to me and said, hey, can you make this work? So I got a chance to discover a lot of cool like animation frameworks, and Josh was my mentor throughout the entire process and telling me like, no, don't do that, or that's screwed up, like do this instead. So yeah, we're going to jump into kind of like really mostly about the comparison of Greensock and Famous. So for me, I learned a lot about how programming is all about managing complexity, because at the end of the day, I would get a ticket on Jira or Basecamp and says like, this needs to be done in the next hour. I'm like, oh crap, how am I going to do that, right? So I would look for a lot of like, spend my time on Stack Overflow or looking at, other examples and code snippets, but really like trying to recreate kind of from a user experience standpoint or from like these like PSD mockups, like how am I going to create all this stuff? So I got a chance to discover kind of like some different frameworks. So over at Third Cousin, we get to work on a lot of different projects, anything from actually creating like, full-on websites and WordPress stuff, to actually creating like cool hybrid apps using Cordova and Intel XDK. So I got a chance to work on some of that stuff, but why we're really here is a little overview. I'm sorry if you can't see that. Maybe I can, is that better? Okay, cool. So animating with JS in general. This is a JavaScript meetup where we're talking a little bit about DOM manipulation earlier. And then like why choosing like frameworks or libraries? Why are we going through abstraction rather than hand coding all this stuff? And then lastly, like we did a little bit about comparison testing between Greensock and Famous, and then our overall evaluation about implementation, et cetera, et cetera. The big question someone asked me at the agency all the time is like, why are you going to use a framework? Why don't you just code it from scratch? And I was just like, well, Mike just told me I have like an hour to implement this. Like, yeah, I can code it from scratch, but will it be cross-browser? Will it have cross-browser support? Will it have cross-platform support? Will another dev be able to pick it up really quick and run with it? And does it have community support? So that's one of the reasons I chose to use frameworks and libraries overall within our kind of like development cycle. But there's also reasons not to use it too, in general. So like if a project requires like a really small like footprint, you're looking at something to create like with like I don't know, like a 20 kilobyte or less than 20 kilobytes or less than 15 kilobytes footprint, then you probably want to create something more bespoke in general. And some of the frameworks can have quite a learning curve. Some clients come up to us and go like, hey, can you create, using this or this? And we're like, well, yeah, we could, but it would just take us a little bit longer to kind of like, figure out. But, you're not paying us to figure it out. You're paying us to implement really quickly. And then it takes time to invest into some of that stuff. Me and Josh go to a lot of meetups, and we invest a lot of our personal time into it, but we're not going to invest our time, on the client's dollar or like, there at the business. So, investment's a key. And then it can be used as a crutch sometimes. You kind of lose some of your, I want to say, real acumen for JavaScript itself with depending too much on, dependencies or abstractions. So that can be one thing. And I found this cool quote on the interwebs. When choosing a framework, it's 1 part intuition, 3 parts experience, 1 part susceptibility to marketing, 1 part cunning, and 5 parts rank opinion. That's 11 parts, but that's besides the point. So I thought that like kind of resonated with me in this overall talk.
So we just pulled out some of like the major frameworks that people use to animate. The first one was Jquery. It seems like everybody knows Jquery. A lot of people use Jquery. It's big, it's this big, beautiful framework. Library that could do pretty much anything for you, right? And then there was Zepto, which a lot of people were moving towards Zepto. Like 2 years ago. Zerb was doing a big push for Zipto. It was supposed to be like jQuery with a lighter footprint. Zerb recently moved back to jQuery. And then we have some other like animation-specific frameworks, like Move.js was a really popular one, but if you look at their GitHub, they've kind of died out. We have Velocity.js, which is actually getting a lot of traction. There was an article written in Smashing Magazine about it just recently. These are the stars on GitHub, by the way. And then we have Train.js, which is built as part of the Crate.js family. And then we have Greensock and Famous. So Greensock is probably my personal favorite. Famous is probably like the popular kid at the playground right now. It's founded by Steve Newcomb. They're out to do some pretty impressive things by building their own rendering engine and whatnot. But we'll get more into that.
And so yeah, so we at the onset of it, Mike at Third Cousin came up to me and was like, "Hey, we need to implement this. What would you use?" And I was like, "Well, I heard that popular kid on the playground who's also known as Famous." And I was like, I want to kind of like see if I can implement some cool DOM manipulations. So I think it was interesting in looking at the way it was written, and it's kind of like telling the browser how to do animations, and as a result, what you want will happen. So in Famous, you kind of like have to create like this canvas. So you initialize this engine, you create the context, then you create all the like widgets, like a grid of bricks, for instance. Then you have to create all these surfaces, which again, these are DOM level elements. And then you have to define your animations. And then at that point, you add bricks or these DOM level elements to the context, and then you apply these animation modifiers. So it can be very verbose, and you have to be very explicit in what you're defining. Which I think it can be extremely powerful because their animation stack is so robust. However, it comes at a really big learning curve at first, and we'll get into that later. While on the other hand, we have Greensock over here. It's a Greensock animation platform. It's a suite of cool libraries where you kind of like tell the browser what you would like to happen, and the library and the framework kind of figures it out for you. So essentially, all you're doing is like Jquery is like you're just calling this like DOM level element, and you say like move from here to there, and it does it in the web browser like quite easily. So that's kind of like the a brief overview of that. So okay, comparing apples to apples, we wanted to kind of like run a comparison test, and so we kind of did something very simple where we did some CSS animations. We did you use keyframes to move these kind of like these blocks, and you see them staggered here. I should have put this other image in, but what we did was we staggered these kind of like columns, and we ran them at different iterations, and we moved them down. We looked at the frame rate overall.
We kind of wanted to see where it broke.
Yeah.
Using just CSS 2D transforms with CSS, 3D transforms with CSS, and then the two frameworks. We wanted to see which one broke first on the different devices.
So we kept adding more bricks to it. And one of the cool things maybe you guys know is that CSS, like a traditional translation, 2D translation is translate Y or translate X. However, it's always better to use 3D transforms in general because it's GPU accelerated. It throws all that processing onto your GPU, and you get better optimization overall. Which is kind of how Greensock and Famous do it. They actually use 3D transforms in order to animate stuff on the DOM. Well, in Greensock, it's not explicit. You have to actually, right here, set your Y translation, and then you have to set like a tiny skew, like a Z translation of like 0.01 in order to force it into that 3D transform. Famous kind of does it automatically. And these are two kind of code snippets of like how you kind of set that up in general. I know this doesn't do much justice because actually in Famous it takes several lines of code to kind of do what you want to do in using Tween Max, for instance. But for the sake of brevity, this is kind of like comparing apples to apples here. So we kind of did like that trying to break the system, so to speak, with the amount of like the bricks or columns we were animating. So on a Mac, we had like 600 columns rendering simultaneously. We kind of broke a little bit in Safari. but Greenstock and Famous held their ground. Their animation stacks are really, really robust. In Windows, and the Windows system that I was using was a little bit slower overall. It was an older computer, so it was breaking at 300 columns in general. You saw like these animations kind of just staggering. So 2D transforms were kind of failing, but 3D transforms, of course, were kind of like, optimized as GPU accelerated. For some reason, we saw kind of like a variance of what was going on between Greenstock and Famous, and also on the mobile devices as well. But overall, like Famous did a really good job in like kind of like being able to hold its own ground with rendering like 600 kind of columns and staying at like a little over 30 frames per second, which was really nice.
So with the experience that we have with integrating with Famous, so it's really cool. They built their own JavaScript engine. So all the rendering is happening with the JavaScript and whatnot. But with that, it had a learning curve. So so he showed this one line of code here. Like, this is the one line of code to translate something. But to get this, you have to build a context, and you have to build a modifier. Then you have to see it's a whole different way of thinking, right? Like whereas the Greenstock, you just throw in a selector and you can move it, right? And so there's pros and cons of both of that. But with Famous, that brings in a learning curve, right? Famous has a really cool like getting started documentation. Like they have Famous University that you can go through, and it gets you to the ground running. But I feel like when you get to the more complicated stuff, then it's kind of hard to find documentation on that. But then on another note, there's been some really cool integration started with like Angular and React and Ember lately to get Famous integrated with the different directives of the view components. They seem to be taking off pretty well. And then lastly, with the Famous community, when I've been stuck on different projects, it seems like it takes days to get like a reply from them. Which, I mean, they're not obligated to reply to me, on Stack Overflow or whatever. But, when I'm working on a project and I get stuck and I put a question on Stack Overflow, 2 days, it's kind of, it's hard to move on, But whereas, on Greenstock it is a really well-documented API. It's working with the DOM as you know it, They don't have that smooth JavaScript engine, but I mean, it's easy to use, and you tweet to them or you put a Stack Overflow question up, and they answer it almost immediately. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Greenstock is a closed source project, right? I mean, I'm not so familiar with that one, but I heard about it.
Well, it's on GitHub. I'm not exactly sure what the.
So yeah, so wrapping up in general, again, I was this intern there at Third Cousin, and they were like, hey, we need you to like build this this web banner or something, and I was like, okay, cool, like what am I going to use to build this like very simple like animation? So again, it's choosing the right framework, library, platform can save you time and money overall. And then I think good documentation is key. Good community is key in order for you to at least learn learn a particular platform better or learn a particular framework better, so that you can actually produce some really fun stuff. And I actually had an opportunity to create so I go to school for actually advertising, and I'm a web developer, but I like creative advertising or interactive advertising. So one of my friends created this this off Deep Woods campaign, and she was like, hey, can you do something with this? And I prototyped this for her in I don't know, less than 30 minutes or something, where I was like, it could be a come and play banner that's 300 by 250, and when you scroll over it, it's all CSS, and so it glows, and this deep off-wood spray comes up that says NA, and then I'm going to build this out some more where the gnats are going to kind of flicker away or whatever. But stuff like that you can do really quickly, depending on which framework you choose or which framework at least you commit to, and then do some really fun stuff. So I had fun doing this. I hope you guys at least had some fun listening. But pending that, any questions? Oh yeah, so for this one I did use Greenstock, yeah. Oh, back there, yeah. No, I haven't personally. Again, most of the projects I've done, we've done a combination of custom coding. We have used some like libraries that are kind of like they're licensing, like I think it's a free licensing. So I haven't run into any issues. A lot of my pieces that I'm creating now are like kind of like my own personal portfolio pieces that I've been having fun with. So yeah. Right. Yeah, repackage it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
We had a talk with him before on Spin specifically about keeping this part of the complication and transitions between views and the type of animation throughout.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like when I was like showing that, it seemed like you don't have to like buy and pull part into famous. Is that not the case? Can you actually like sprinkle in where you have a web page? You know,
Yeah, we talked about.
We talked about that a lot, and actually, there's actually an article on Greensock that's like Greensock versus Famous or whatever. With the Greensock, the guy that's like kind of spearheading the Greensock is called Greensock Jack, and he wrote this article on that, and his argument was that you can't really sprinkle Famous in like you can Greensock, but about 20 people wrote replies saying, "Oh yes, you can." I think that would be very hard because. I mean, I kind of agree with the Greensock Jack. I think Famous is kind of cool, but I think everything's built on like context and stuff. But with that said, there are some really cool like Angular. There's an Angular integration that they built that allows you to animate your views and your components with Angular. So I guess it depends. I guess it depends on what you're doing. But yeah, there's that cool article you want to check out.
I haven't looked in a while, but the last time I checked, Famous's answer to IE support was, quote, IE does not support us, unquote.
So yeah, so Steve Newcomb is an interesting character. Like he's like a larger than life, he's one of the co-founders and CEOs, and he kind of has like this like off-putish, I guess, kind of stance on a lot of things. He gives everyone the middle finger basically. So I think that's correct in saying.
You know, it's interesting because when we were talking, so we were preparing this with Mike, our boss at Third Cousin, and when we were preparing it, he pulled out the iPad, and I just assumed it was going to work on the iPad because that's like what they advertise. You know, like it's like they want to blur the barrier between iOS native and web technologies, right? They say that right on their website, right? So he pulls out the iPad, and their own examples wouldn't work on the iPad, which I thought was. I mean, we didn't spend time debugging why, but we just went straight to their site and pulled up their examples, and the iPad crashed. So I mean.
Yeah, my understanding also is that they have memory problems, so for mobile, not necessarily good. Where I was going with this was, I don't know anything about Greensock. Just what does their browser support look like? What does their memory usage look like? Are they something that we can use in production? Because Famous has basically said, I am unusable in any production situation.
Correct. Yeah. So your question is, can you use?
Is that true for Greensock, or like how is
we
their
just we just worked on a pretty big project that was like a game, and as far as our internal test went, everything it all checked. I mean, we use it a lot. Or we don't use it a lot, but we use it on several projects, and it's always performed well for us. And like we just worked with another firm and launched a game, and the game seems to be working fine. It's passed all of its QA. And it was fully using Greensock.
And a lot of interactive agencies are actually using Greensock for production. They've used it like with HTC, with Nissan, with a lot of like big companies out there. So yeah, Greensock is actually a really, really like production ready, library.
Greensock started with Flash. You know, it was a Flash component, and then it became a JavaScript component.
Oh.
No, well, I haven't.
We haven't yet. We kind of looked at it, and we got really excited about it. We looked through some of the documentation. We hadn't had an opportunity to implement yet. I think that's between like going into the Ember meetups now and looking at all these frameworks.
I can give a little bit of insight on that. So the prototype Jquery was in GSAP because all the reasons that you said, the documentation is awesome. It's really easy to find out how to do
Well, we were trying to, yeah.
I love GSAP, and I miss GSAP so much.
Well, we were trying to look up velocity, you know, because we wanted to come up with 1 point. So, yeah, like we hadn't used it, but like we both read this smashing article thing about it. We're like, whoa, this is cool, you know. But yeah, we found that flow too. We tried to Google it before we came here, and we were getting testing engines and all kinds of stuff.
We've been able to do most of those things, but
Philosophy.
Oh yeah.
curves, in order to do some of the things, they just don't have as much built into GSAP. So I definitely see GSAP as being a much more full featured than velocity.
Yeah, for sure.
The second generation of Flash tools came out, and the big differentiator was all built-in animation templates like explosions.
Mm-hmm.
You could choose the explosion thing in sprites. Did they have the
Yeah, so they actually, in some of their like examples, they have ways to implement like an explosion or like a fire effect and stuff like that. Particle simulator. That's kind of like what I'm using here. It's just a simple particle simulator. But yeah, they have like a lot of like. It's really easy to like.
One of the problems is there's only like 3 canned animation things, and everybody's going to be using it, and all of our websites will breathe a little bit life if we're using it. So
You can modify it to
how
your.
many do they have?
I don't know. I couldn't answer that off the top of my
Well,
head.
you could change. There's so many. Like it's so easy to It's so easy to modify and change and customize. Like she was saying about the easing. There's all these easing functions. You could have like a ball bounce and do yo-yos, and then you could chain something else onto it and have it move to the left, and then you could have it do 5 replays. You know, so there may only be there's a lot, but even if there was only a few, there's so many different customizations that you could do to each one that I don't think. I think that.
I think the word you're looking for is expressive.
Yes. There you go. Thank you. Is that it?
Did you look at other frameworks besides those 2 that you mentioned? I heard obviously Velocity. There are quite a lot of frameworks out there. Schema.js, Vue.js,
Yeah, so we've used CreateJS, at the firm. We've built I think 2 games with CreateJS, and we've had a fun time with it. So the founder of CreateJS, I don't remember his name.
Skinner.
Grant Skinner, yeah. Grant Skinner. He was. I actually met him at a conference. And then I also gave a talk on CreateJS at the last Jquery conference. But so CreateJS is cool. It's a whole suite of tools, and Grant Skinner also started the GreenSock, right? So when GreenSock was Flash, he started that, and then he moved it over to JavaScript, and then he left the GreenSock framework to go start CreateJS. But they're very similar. I love CreateJS. I mean, we haven't done anything recently in CreateJS, but we did like 2 or 3 projects, and I think it's pretty awesome. It's cool that the whole framework works with each other. Like different components.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for your time, guys.